Ganbare Goemon 3, or, as I'd like to think it would have been known had it ever come out in North America, Mystical Ninja Through Time. This is the third Super Famicom Mystical Ninja game, and of course the negative second one that never came out in North America because they, for whatever reason, like to think that we wouldn't have enjoyed this. Or maybe it was too Japanese. The point is, we never got it. I'm bitter about it because these games are really fun. But this one is a lot different than the others. Well, except for that one weird puzzle game I refuse to talk about. Now the story, or at the very least what I can make of it, the wise old man has gone and done it again. He's gone out and built himself a time machine so he can go to the future and pick up chicks. I'm not joking, that does seem to be what the actual plot implies. But Ibisumaru's far distant French Catholic descendant decides to kidnap him in an attempt that I can only assume is to make this canon. And nobody wants that. Seriously, just no. So now Goemon and pals have to meet up and go rescue him, and help save the entire timeline so we don't have to deal with this. Now, what makes this game so different compared to Ganbare Goemon 1, 2, and 4 is, while you're probably expecting this, and maybe even this, while this game does have these things, they're all wrapped up in the giant glue that is this. Yes, instead of it being a kick-ass 2D platformer, it is more of a top-down adventure-style game, which immediately means it's going to be compared by everyone to Link to the Past. And my frustration with other people's inability to describe games beyond its sort of like X game aside, this game does take place sort of similarly to the original Super Nintendo Mystical Ninja, which also did feature adventure game elements. However, unlike that game where it was more of a side thing that you occasionally had to deal with, it's been moved to the forefront and is the main focus of gameplay. Now in this adventure we of course have our hero, Goemon, who plays like the average character he is. He's not particularly fast, but he's not particularly weak either. You've got Ibisumaru, who has once again traded in his weapon for something completely different, this time a hula hoop, which is, yes, as awkward a weapon as you can imagine. He's slower than the rest of the characters, but he hits harder. You've got everyone's favorite party clockwork robot ninja, Sasuke, complete with, once again, the dedicated raise the roof button. Rock on, little guy, rock on. And joining the playable cast for the first time on the Super Nintendo is Ninja Babe Yae, rocking the katana, bazooka, and armed with the ability to turn to the most majestic of sea creatures, the mermaid. Ain't she grand? Now each of these characters all have their own unique perks and disadvantages, but all of their different weapons and special abilities are going to be integral parts of both getting around the platforming environments as well as the 3D environments. Beyond your four main characters, you also of course have Impact returning, although this time his pre-fight battle scenes seem a little bit weirder to control, seeing as he walks forward on his own and you have to basically just control a targeting reticle for both offensive and defensive purposes. Because of this, it's also very easy to get hurt while you're trying to score higher points, or alternatively, your score will suffer trying to defend yourself, which is largely unfortunate. But following these stages comes the first-person impact fight scenes, which work as well as they did in the first game. They're very stylish, although they do seem to be a lot easier in this game. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. In Ganbare Goemon 2, they were actually really hard, so they're a little bit more manageable this time around. Now going into the main key gameplay here, of course, is the top-down adventure modes. You have two maps to cover, the first one being, of course, feudal Japan, as well as, once you unlock it, the future. Now this is one large linear thing, so once you're done completing all the dungeons in feudal Japan, you get shuffled into future Japan. And this can be something of a problem because some key collectible items can be missed. Now, you can still complete the game without them, however, collecting all of them is required to get a better ending. So it's a bit unfortunate that once you move on, if you haven't collected everything, you're basically screwed out of the best way to finish the game. And you'll have less health in the end, so it kind of makes everything harder. Basically just collect everything, or if you're going to play this game, go with a guide, because it is a bit unfortunate to miss a lot of stuff, just because you weren't aware you couldn't go back and collect it. Once you make it into the future, you will shortly gain the power of mechs. Yes, you get your own steampunk mechs to run around with and smash cars and whatever. It's a very empowering feeling, and it's definitely important in regards to key puzzle-solving elements. Beyond that, the top-down adventure mode is fairly basic. You walk around, you enter dungeons, you collect various objects to make you stronger or to advance the plot. There is one fundamental problem with this, and this is only for people who don't understand Japanese, of course. But it being an adventure game, a lot of the plot progression comes from talking to people, either to gain new abilities or gain hints as to what you're supposed to do in order to advance the game. But not being able to understand them is a bit of a problem, and that's honestly why I would recommend this game the least over all the other games on the system. Simply because there's a greater focus of adventure game elements, and the language barrier does make it a lot harder to deal with. That said, the game is still relatively straightforward, and if you have trouble reading the language like I do, you can still get through the game relatively simply. Only once or twice did I ever get stuck. Now the 2D platforming elements are back, just as they were in Ganbare Goemon 2, although this time they have been tweaked slightly to serve as a foil for the adventure mode. Of course, they have been modified to take into consideration all 4 characters as well as the mechs, but more importantly, as compared to Ganbare Goemon 2, which was a fairly basic 2D platformer, because the key focus of the game is that it is an adventure, these 2D platforming levels serve as the dungeons, which means they have to be redesigned to be more maze-like. So instead of just getting from point A to point B, now you have to collect keys, now you have to solve very rudimentary puzzles, now you have to figure out exactly where you're supposed to go in these labyrinth areas. And this can get confusing at times, which is yet another reason why I would say this isn't quite as good as the previous entry. Now, it wouldn't be a Goemon game if it didn't contain a lot of different minigames, and this game does have them, but unlike Ganbare Goemon 2, where they were pretty much all largely optional things you could do just to kill time and see just how big the game was, this time they're for the most part mandatory, and usually associated with earning new abilities. Because of this, if you're not particularly good with the minigames, or you don't understand the instructions for them, they could be a lot more challenging than they necessarily set out to be, which is a bit unfortunate. That said, they are for the most part creative and still pretty fun to try either way. But personally, I would have preferred them to be optional. Now, the presentation of Ganbare Goemon 3 is excellent. All the characters you know and love look the way they do, the bosses are creative and pretty outrageously designed, and all the environments look good. Audio-wise, the soundtrack is well produced, although not quite as catchy as the previous game. I did, however, like the inclusion of both voice clips, mostly just shopkeepers welcoming you to their store, but it's a nice touch, as well as a very tinny laugh track, which, to be fair, the first time I heard it, I didn't know what was going on, but once you figure out that that's actually supposed to be a laugh track, it's kind of a nice touch. It helps to tie together the fact that this is supposed to be a giant, goofy Goemon adventure, which is definitely a key thing when it comes to Goemon games. Now, if you would like to get Ganbare Goemon 3, it's not terribly expensive or hard to find. My copy cost pretty much the same as Ganbare Goemon 2, but, and I would like to stress this, the fact that it is more an adventure game than the rest means that it is going to be more heavily focused on figuring out information, talking to people, and figuring out exactly what you're supposed to do. And if your ability to read the language isn't as up to snuff, I wouldn't recommend this game as much. As I previously said, this is probably the one I would least likely recommend out of all of them on the Super Famicom. That said, the game is still relatively straightforward and pretty fun all the same. If you think this is a concern, I would more actively recommend Ganbare Goemon 4, which still had a little bit more of a language barrier than the first or second one, but was far more linear and easily accessible by design, or the second one, which required virtually zero understanding of the language. But either way, this is still a fun, goofy Goemon adventure on the Super Famicom, which means it's going to be a well-produced, enjoyable game. I just wish there was a bit more emphasis on the platforming this time around. But if nothing else, it's still a lot less odd than that weird Ibisumaru puzzle thing.